Hello and welcome all. Thank you for joining the Diversity in Water Speaker Series event this afternoon. Before we get started, I would just like to remind everyone to go on mute. And if you would, please use the chat. We ask that you put your name, work location, and organization in the chat just to introduce yourself. Also, feel free to ask our speakers any questions you may have along the way. At the end, we'll try to cover all of our questions. If we're unable to get to them, we'll give you an opportunity to email our speaker. Before we get started, I want to talk a little bit about the Diversity in Water Speaker Series. And so this speaker series is to highlight the stories of diverse leaders in the water industry, how their identity has impacted their journey, and how they see diversity playing a role in the future of water. Our speaker for this event is Lorraine Krzyzewski. Lorraine is the Watershed Manager for the Columbus Division of Water, Watershed Management Section, where her responsibilities include management of the city's 4 drinking water reservoirs and watershed protection efforts extending over a 13-county area. Lorraine has over 25 years of experience working to safeguard Columbus's water supply. She holds an undergraduate degree in environmental science with a focus on water quality and a Master of Education in STEM education, both from The Ohio State University. She was honored to be inducted into OSU School of Environment and Natural Resources, ENR Honorary 100 in 2020. Lorraine served as the city's project manager of Columbus's 2017 Watershed Master Plan, and works alongside her team to implement numerous strategies used to protect the source water supply and 1.4 million customers. Lorraine is a member of the Ohio AWWA Source Water Protection Committee. We are very, very glad to have Lorraine with us today and have the opportunity to hear from her. But before I turn it over to her, I would like to talk a little bit about the Diversity in Water Planning Committee. So there are 5 of us that make up the Planning Committee. We are water professionals throughout Ohio, and we have a diverse background of work experience. Our speaker series highlights leaders across the industry, and which is our main focus. The team's efforts are on behalf of the AWWA Ohio Section's Diversity and Inclusion Committee, who promote diversity in the water industry, and the Ohio AWWA YP Committee, or Young Professionals. The YP Committee is committed to the advancement of students and young professionals in the water industry and serves as a welcoming map for students and YPs to the industry. AWWA defines a YP as someone who is 35 years old or younger and has been in the industry for less than 10 years. But all water professionals are welcome to join. There's a QR code where you can join our mailing list. I'd like to thank Lorraine for taking the time to join us today, and I'll go ahead and turn it over to her.
It's been very, very informative. I've learned so much about some coworkers past and present, and I'm really glad that you offer this opportunity for people to share their stories. So I'm looking forward to sharing mine. I am a watershed manager within the city of Columbus, so a lot of my story is going to be a reflection on how I got my start in this field and what my career has been like. And I'm going to divide it into 5 different areas. We're going to spend a lot of time on the early years because for me, I feel like a lot of what led me to this particular career happened before college. And then we'll talk about, why water and some specifics on my career highlights. And then I'll conclude with just some reflections. This whole process for me has been a great way for me to look back on my career, to think about all the people who influenced me. And really, it brought back a lot of great memories. And I was telling Tony, things like this often have cascading benefits. my parents, as they helped me find some of these old photographs, now they're going through pictures that they haven't looked at in decades. So it's just been a really good experience, and I'm very thankful to be a part of it. So to get started, my story begins a little bit like the country mouse and the city mouse. Except for in my version, the country mouse marries the city mouse, moves to Columbus, and has 2 children, one of which is me. So the country mouse is my mom, and she grew up on a dairy farm, and the city mouse is my dad, and he grew up in the city of Columbus. He had lived there his whole life, and we grew up in a community called Clintonville. If you're from Columbus, you've probably heard of Clintonville. If not, it is a really traditional neighborhood. It's known to be walkable. It's surrounded by a park and a library, and it's a great place to grow up. The houses have a lot of character to them, and I'd say the people do too. It's a place I'm glad my dad chose to raise us. I love it so much. I've stayed there, and that's where I'm raising my family. So I've lived here for 50 years, and I wasn't going to tell you my age, but I have worked for the Division of Water for 30 years, and I didn't start when I was 10. So you can kind of figure out I'm around 50. And these pictures that I'm showing on the screen, they're from a realtor who's advertising Clintonville, but I really feel like they capture Clintonville in its essence. And it's also kind of hard to get these colorful pictures in the middle of winter. So if you've never been to Clintonville, come and visit and see what all the fuss is about. So my mom, the country mouse, though, although she was happy growing up in Clintonville, she made sure we did one thing that she remembered from her country experience, and that was both my sister and I had to join 4-H as soon as we were old enough. And 4-H is one of those organizations that's often associated with agriculture or country upbringing, but there's really something in this organization for all youth, including a city kid like me. And I bring it up today because I really credit my 4-H experience for giving me the leadership experiences and the skills that helped put me on this path. So when you're in 4-H, you learn about leadership through various activities. There's clubs, and you can serve as an officer in that club, even when you're only 10 years old. You know, you might have the role of treasurer or secretary. You follow Robert's rules. So it's a great way to kind of learn how decisions are made as a committee, and to be a part of a group that's really planning activities, whether that's a camp or a fair. There's a junior fair board. A lot of event planning, and then with that comes confidence in public speaking. And you see there's an opportunity, you know, from ages 9 all the way up till age 19, you know, for these progressive leadership roles. There are county, state, and even national camps that you can get involved in. And all that is in addition to the skills that you can work on. Sometimes you hear about, you know, I had a steer in 4-H, or I took a lamb. Well, if you don't live in the country, you take projects like sewing, cooking, nutrition, and art. But one of the best things about for me in 4-H was just the ability to connect with people all over the state. I attended so many camps as a kid. I mean, I basically lived at camp all summer. And at one point, I could say that I had met somebody from all 88 counties in Ohio, which, you know, as someone who was still in high school, I felt like that was a pretty big accomplishment. But, you know, it also gave me an appreciation for what it was like to grow up in small towns, you know, towns with populations less than the size of my high school. So I really enjoyed, you know, staying in touch with those friendships and the people I'd met in the summer. And we wrote a lot of letters and did a lot of pen pals. This was before the days of email, so we were still using paper and pen. Let's see, sorry. One of my favorite things about 4-H, though, was 4-H camp. And this is a picture of Camp Ohio. This is a modern picture, but this activity, the flag raising and flag lowering, was a part of every camp, even back when I went there. And the best part of 4-H camp, of course, was the outdoor experiences. And this is where I first got my feet wet in something that they called stream study. So right through the middle of Camp Ohio, there is a stream. It's the Rocky Fork Stream. You can see it there in the upper right of the screen. And as part of camp, you could go and kick seine and find all these amazing little fish that you wouldn't even know lived there because you can't see them, but they're there, and crayfish. And this just became like my favorite activity at camp. I loved to participate in it. And as I got older and became a counselor, I loved to lead this activity. there was just something really exciting about seeing kids discover these little fish. Some of them were very colorful. They were probably darters. I didn't know how to identify them back then, but all I knew was that they were really neat. There was even a 4-H camp up on Kelly's Island that I became aware of, and I was a camper and then went on to be a counselor. And this camp really focused on water. We were teaching kids how about water quality in Lake Erie. We also were teaching them how to operate outboard motors, how to catch, clean, and cook fish, make our own lures. And for kids who loved water, it was a really amazing experience. And some of these campers, they had never been to Lake Erie before. So you are, again, really experiencing things as a first through their eyes. And as I've become a mom and been able to participate in school events and other opportunities to continue the stream study, I just really feel like it's such a valuable experience to have as a kid. So many of the people I know in the water industry, especially those who work in watershed management or lake management, they credit these early childhood experiences playing in creeks with what led them to their career. Well, a big part of 4-H is also the fair. There's county fair and then there's state fair. So for me, the state fair was always a part of and associated with 4-H. We lived pretty close to the state fairgrounds. So when it came time for one of my first real summer jobs, I looked to the state fair, and I worked in an area known as youth gardens. So we were taking care of the plants that people were entering to win blue ribbons. The fair back then was 17 days long, and I was out there every day. And this experience in youth gardens led me to a position on the Ohio State Fair Junior Fair Board, which that is a great opportunity for kids who are in youth organizations like 4-H or Girl Scouts or just any of the youth development. They can have a representative on fair board. And when you're on fair board, you have the fun of assisting in some of the events that go on at the fair, many of which people don't even know about. And there's contests and just special events, from the concerts in the evenings to things like cheerleading contests and even auctioneers calling contests. So as a member of Fair Board, you get to assist in those and really represent the fair. I love this experience. I loved working at the fair. There's just something special about the fair in my mind. It's bringing together the urban and the rural, and kind of it's a place to learn and have fun doing it. So I just really think that, looking back, that these were some of the best memories I have of growing up. So what led me to water? Well, there's 3 things I really like: fish, fishing, and Florida. And you'll see that those are all tied together by one common denominator, and that is you need good water for those things to happen. So growing up, I always had fish as pets. I didn't have an aquarium. I had fish bowls. We didn't have room for an aquarium. So I'd go to the pet store with my mom, and they would say, "Oh, you'd like a fish? What size aquarium do you have?" And I'd have to say, "Oh, I just have a fish bowl." But I had progressively larger size fish bowls. So I was still limited, though, to guppies and goldfish. And, I just had this desire to really have fish, that were more exotic. So to me, going fishing was a way to kind of like get to see these fish that I couldn't have as pets. And I really loved the catch of the fish, not necessarily, catching to eat, but just seeing what was down there and pulling something up. And fishing had been a big part of our family. It'd been a big part of our family, fun, for just something my dad really liked to do. So he made sure my sister and I had plenty of opportunities to go fishing. And they weren't always to extravagant, locations. In fact, quite the opposite. Some of our best memories fishing were actually made at the Ohio State Fair. We would get up super early so we could be among the first group to go through the catfishing area at the ODNR Natural Resources Park. So here's a picture of me fishing, hoping to catch one. And judging by the pictures that my mom showed me, it looks like my younger sister caught a big catfish, and my dad decided to take a picture of me, maybe having just lost a big one. But my coworker wanted to see some throwback pictures of me, little me fishing. So there you go. Now, we did make it to Florida to fish too. And I'd say Florida fishing is really great because there's about twice the number of species you can catch. Where there's about 150 sport fish in Ohio, there's close to 300 sport fish in Florida. And then if you're connected to the ocean, there's about 1,000 other species that you might catch. So the mystery of what might be on the other end of your line is really, it's heightened in Florida. So I was lucky enough that my grandparents bought a house in Florida when I was about 5 years old. And these are some pictures of my sister and I with some of our catches. The picture on the left is me with my favorite species of fish. It's a snook. And then my sister and I on the bench were holding a couple jacks. And I can't say whether that's the Florida humidity that's responsible for that crazy hairdo, but it was a lot of fun. And when we weren't actively fishing, this is what I looked like on the rest of the Florida vacations. I was belly down on the dock with a small net in my hand, trying to catch those little minis, as we called them. Some people refer to this as micro fishing, but you can actually, catch little fish. And we would catch these fish. We would put them in buckets, kind of have our little temporary aquarium and then release them. So when I first looked at this picture, I had to chuckle because it looks like my sister's headless, but she's got dark hair and she's wearing one of those old style life jackets. So if you couldn't quite understand the picture, maybe now you see it. But yeah, favorite activity in Florida, not the beach, dock fishing. And this picture, it's a more current picture of my grandparents' house, but I wanted to show it to you so you can see how their house and their canal kind of connected to a bay and then the ocean. So that's the Gulf in the background. And what was special about these canals is that, when the tides would come in, they would bring with them the fish that had been out, in the deeper water, and the fish would come in looking to feed. They would also come in when it was time to, lay eggs. And these backwaters really served as important habitat for young fish. Specifically, the mangroves, which is a type of plant that grows along the shorelines in Florida, they provide, through their root systems, great habitat for young fish. Fish can get in there and hide from the big predators. And the mangroves are also really important for helping Florida withstand storms. We just knew them as the place to cast when you wanted to try and catch a big fish, because where the little fish are, the big fish are too. When we weren't in Florida fishing, back in Ohio, we were reading about Florida. My dad subscribed to a magazine called Florida Sportsman. And once a month, we would get this magazine and go through it. And you could learn about what was biting. And then you could also read about why they weren't biting. And there was a lot of stories about conservation and environmental issues that you could read about. And, we had noticed some issues. We'd go to Florida one year and we'd hear about something called red tide, which we know now is an algal growth that's happening because of nutrients, and it really affects fish. It can make beaches unusable. It can result in massive fish kills. And you can see in the picture in the bottom right, just how many fish live in these little canals. And when something like red tide comes through, how destructive it can be. And it's just, as someone who loves to fish, it's so sad to see things like this happen. So I was learning a lot about Florida, about fisheries management, and about water quality just from this magazine. And again, this is in a time before there was internet. So, magazines like this, it was where a lot of people went to find out information about what's going on in the world of water quality and fishing. Sadly, over the time, just from those early pictures up through high school, we saw a dramatic decline in the fishing in Florida, and especially in the area around where my grandparents lived. And eventually we stopped going to Florida. They sold the house, and the situation really has not improved much since then. And as I was going through some pictures, trying to find images of, what this area looks like now, I came across this really sad story about some researchers who were trying to replicate the mangroves, which had then since then been removed. And what you see here in this picture in the lower left, that is my grandparents' house. That's their backyard, and there's no more dock. Sorry, it's so sad. There's just a seawall, and there's no place to fish. So you can't really replicate that with concrete and oyster shells. So anyway, sorry. So going on to college, I felt like I had to do something about this loss and the water quality issues that in my mind were just, unfair to see that habitat was being harmed and kids maybe wouldn't have the great fishing that I had grown up with. So I had this choice, do I go for a career in science? And I didn't really think that I wanted to spend most of my life in a lab, and I didn't really know what all the field of science could include. So I was also thinking about art because I was kind of this creative and crafty person, but I decided to play it safe and go with science because I wanted to make sure I ended up with a degree that would lead to a good job. I went to Ohio State, and it was a pretty easy choice to go there because it was right down the road, but I didn't decide on my major for a full 2 years. I really wanted time to explore and kind of figure some things out. And going to Ohio State was a little bit of a culture shock for me because, even though I'd grown up in a city as big as Columbus, which wasn't quite as big as it is now, there was 10,000 freshmen in the class my first year at Ohio State. And I lived in the honors dorm, and we were right next door to a graduate student dorm. So my experiences with diversity started then. I really was exposed to people from a lot more countries that I had ever met before. And, the dining hall, we would just see all these new faces and making new friends. It was really a great experience. And then while I was at Ohio State, I was looking for a job, and I ended up at the state 4-H office. And then, as you'll see here, it led to an unexpected journey overseas. So at the state 4-H office, it's where all the planning happens for the state. Now, there's planning at the county level, the state level, and even the national level. Also, in addition to planning camps and the project books, in this office, they conduct the international programs that 4-H offers. And when I started there, I didn't even know 4-H had international programs. But there they were in the back of this office. There was a woman that ran the international activities, including exchange programs where we were bringing kids over from Japan for 6 weeks at a time, sometimes over a year. And then there was also kids, 4-Hers that were leaving Ohio and going to live overseas for 6 months. So I got to help her in doing some matchmaking. And also, we were preparing the outbound 4-Hers for their experiences overseas. And with that came a lot of need to educate on cultural differences. So this was a great internship for me. And I just had no idea this would lead not only to our family hosting a German exchange student, but to me traveling to Denmark for 6 months when I became one of the outbound exchange students. And I don't have any pictures of Denmark here because that's a whole presentation on its own. In fact, when we got back, we had to give presentations to Rotary clubs, and really that helped with our public speaking. But when I was in Denmark, I had an opportunity to travel Europe myself, just on the trains. And being 20 years old and navigating that system of trains and places to stay each night for a month without the aid of a smartphone or internet. Looking back, I don't know how I did that, but it definitely helped you feel a lot more independent. And when I came back from this trip, I felt like I had grown up a little bit, and it was time to get serious, time to pick a major. So I ended up deciding to major in environmental science with a focus on water quality. This was a major that Ohio State offered, and to me, it was a great blend of my strong interest in water and fish and natural resources. I think it was a great fit then, and it's a great fit today. But when I returned, I also realized that it was time for me to get an internship in an area that was closer to this new major, and that led me to look at the Division of Water. The Division of Water's headquarters at 910 was very close to campus, so I could drive there in about 5 minutes. They had an opening, and so I started as a student intern there in 1994. I worked for the engineers, and we did fun things like, read old plans and study engineering drawings because we were collecting data that would become part of an early GIS system. This was before GIS, so this attribute data, like when the line was installed, what material it was made of, what size it was, we would study, sheet by sheet, every index sheet of the city and all these old plans and capture that information. I learned how to read tap cards, how to read these engineering drawings. And then we also had a lot of fun. We'd go around to water tanks, and I got to observe leak tests and flow tests. And I really enjoyed this. It was a great way to get introduced to the Division of Water. I met a lot of super friendly faces. And I learned that there was this other section called the Watershed Management Section that had just started that year. And I got to thinking, you know, I wasn't studying to be an engineer. So I didn't know, and I wasn't going to be a chemist. So I didn't know what options I would have to stay in the Division of Water, but I knew this new Watershed Management Section that was over the reservoirs. That was probably where I needed to be to get the experiences closer related to my field. So I heard they had a student intern, but it was currently, you know, occupied by somebody. So I had to wait 2 years until that position was vacant, and then I could go up to Watershed to be their intern. So I started at Watershed, and the environment was a little bit different. I mean, it was beautiful. We work right on the banks of Hoover Reservoir, and Watershed Management, we're in charge of the dams, the reservoirs, and really safeguarding the city's water supply. And 85% of the water that Columbus treats each day comes from a reservoir like one of these. So caring for them and caring for the land around them was really important. When I started as an intern here, my work was a little different. You know, down at 910, I had been doing a lot of the same. You know, every day was similar, just grabbing a new plan sheet. But up here, my first real job or task was a project. And it was to do a survey on reservoir recreation throughout the country. So what I learned is that, you know, there were issues with recreation in the reservoirs, and the boat clubs, the people fishing, they didn't get along well with the sailboats. And the rowers were complaining that the big boats were causing wakes. And the jet skiers, well, they just wanted on the reservoir, but they weren't allowed. And people wanted larger boats and larger engines. So the manager at the time gave me the task to survey how other reservoirs similar to ours operated. So I had to design a survey, get the responses back, analyze the information, and then present it in a report. And then once I turned in my report, the manager said, "Oh, this is really good. I want you to present this information at our next meeting." So for me, it was a very valuable project because I saw that the information I gathered was really valued by the people that asked me to do it. I mean, they were actually using the information that I gathered. And I learned a lot about reservoir and recreation and the conflicts and why some of these issues were actually water quality issues. You know, we didn't just keep boat sizes to smaller boats because we wanted to limit use. No, it had direct bearing on sedimentation and erosion and protecting our shorelines. So it was a good introduction to some of the more complex issues that come along with managing reservoirs, and especially when different stakeholders want to do different things. I was also able to work on some projects that helped people understand how their activities impacted water quality. So we did some early school outreach and design of some educational programs. And then I had another assignment, and this assignment was, we had no way at the time to capture in a picture or a map form all of the areas that we were responsible for. And at the time, the Division of Water was trying to change the way that many of these areas were managed, kind of reducing mowing, getting more native and tall grasses, more trees. So we needed maps. And I remember working with one of the other watershed management employees at the time who taught me how to use a program that took aerial images, because disclaimer, again, this is before there was Google Earth. So before there was mass GIS systems, we had to take a photograph and then overlay a drawing program and trace areas. And this other staff member who taught me this graphic software, and he was pretty instrumental in my career, because little did I know, but that knowledge on how to use graphics would become pretty important for me going on in my career, as people needed maps, and I was the map maker. I knew how to create these images. And again, the document that I produced, this map of all the reservoir areas, was a document that became very important to our staff, our maintenance teams. And I still have a copy of it over on my bookshelf over there, because it's not only a good reminder you know, what I was working on back then, but, you know, it turned out pretty well. So I was kind of proud of that. Midway through this time, I was still not sure what I wanted to do career-wise, and I had a fateful conversation with one of my fellow OSU natural resources students, and he said, "Oh, I'm going to go to the education school, and I'm going to get a degree to teach." And I learned that OSU offered a program where if you had your undergraduate in a subject matter area, you could become a teacher in that subject with only like a year and a half of study. So I think back then it was 6 quarters. This was before they were on a semester system. So I thought that sounded like a great idea. I love that flexibility of maybe I want to be a teacher. I'll have this other, you know, feather in my cap and ability plus a master's degree. In my mind, always looked good. So I enrolled in the grad program in the College of Education, and did my student teaching experiences. I really enjoyed working with kids. I mean, even going back to the camp days, I just loved teaching kids about science. So I was student teaching to be a science teacher like biology or environmental science for grades 7 through 12. Had job offers, even one in Florida, and I decided at the end of the day that no, I really didn't want to be a teacher. I think one of the main reasons was my voice is kind of quiet. You know, by nature, I'm a softer spoken person. And it was just really difficult for me to day after day, you know, go in and really have to project and have that enthusiasm for science, even when, you know, the kids kind of had other ideas or when there was issues with discipline. I just was struggling there. So luckily for me, I had the ability to stay on with the Division of Water because there was a desire to grow more education programs within Watershed. There was a lot of people who still didn't know what we did, why the Division of Water was here at the reservoirs, and they didn't see the connection between what they were doing on their property with how they could be helping or hurting water quality. So I was very lucky that I was able to kind of stay on with the Division of Water, and my first real full-time job was an administrative analyst. Also during this time, something happened with the manager who was working with Watershed Management at the time, and he was really instrumental in getting me off to a good start. He was the one assigning me these great projects, giving me the opportunity to present them, and served as a great mentor. And then one day he said, "I'm leaving. I'm going downtown, and they need me for a job down there." So I was a little bit, I guess, distraught. Might be too strong of a word, but I was like, "Oh darn! You know, this this person who was really caring about my career and helping me is now leaving." So it was a little bit sad, but you know, we got along, and I kept trucking, and the projects kept going. And every once in a while, this manager would contact me and say, "Hey, would you mind helping me out with this?" Or, "Hey, I've got this little project." So he would trickle some projects in now and then that, again, gave me more good experiences. And then one day he called and said, "Hey, Lorraine, I've got a bigger project for you." So the City of Columbus Division of Water, at that time, this was around 1998, there was a movement going across utilities nationwide to privatize utilities. The private companies were coming into public utilities and meeting with them and saying, "We will give you this many millions of dollars to buy your utility and all your assets, and then we will run it." And it became a very tempting offer for some utilities that weren't managed well. Columbus was managed well, but we felt like we could do better. And we wanted to really minimize that risk of somebody coming along saying, "We can do this better, cheaper, faster." So we looked internally, and that was the goal, is to help find ways to become more competitive by improving efficiencies. And the Division of Water had brought on a consultant to help analyze all aspects of the business. And that consultant needed some support. Really, they needed someone who was a note taker and could come around and kind of like, just help with some administrative assistance. And they didn't have anybody. So that was my role. That role quickly turned into something more because I stayed with this project for 5 years, almost to its completion. Throughout this project, and one of the best things about it is they didn't want to make top-down changes. They wanted the ideas that would improve efficiency to come from the employees. So we developed, 8 employee-led teams, each looking at a specific area of the operation. Those employees were charged with coming up with ways to improve. And it wasn't just cost savings measures. There was, they wanted to make sure there was opportunities to improve the culture, to right size, or to, reorganize how the way we did our business, that we looked at everything. And so for me, as a person who had been in a natural resources environmental science world, I was learning business terms like workflow, cross-training, efficiency, culture, and finance. So it was a really good introduction to, all the things that go into managing utility, not just the water and the science of water. So the skills I was picking up personally included meeting facilitation, because there was a lot of, discussion, and, these groups of people, they could just talk all day, and you really needed to drive them to some decision making, and that required facilitation. All of these ideas needed consolidated into a report. So we had to distill the essence of what they were recommending and present that in a way that was very well organized and outlined. And then there was also opportunities to do more public speaking, when we needed to address everybody, getting up in front of big crowds and kind of leading the conversation or presenting the results. I had opportunities to do that too. And this really was probably one of the most instrumental tasks or projects that I ever had in my career. And it was so big, we even took a picture with all the people who participated in it. So, but that project ended, and we implemented many of the ideas that were brought up. But when it ended, I was trying to figure out, where do I go from here? Do I go private? Do I go back to Watershed? And I decided that the best course for me was to go back to Watershed. And it was 2003. And I actually had an opportunity to apply for the Watershed Manager position. And this is the top position in Watershed. It was vacant. And throughout this experience, with the competitive initiative, a lot of people had said, oh, you'd be really good at that. You should apply. You could be the manager. So I applied, and I'm so glad I did. It was a great way to see just how much I didn't know about managing, because I had never actually managed people, or had a staff to manage. And so I'm very glad that I didn't get the position, but it was also a great way for me to see what I needed to learn if I ever did wanted to step into that role. So I became a supervisor over the ranger staff. So it was a new supervisory role for me, going from a staff position to management. And I had never been a ranger myself, which was a little bit of a deficit, or a detriment, but I would say I kind of brought to the table things that the group needed. I had this holistic appreciation of the division. I had my education, and I had the ability to facilitate meetings. What I didn't have was that frontline experience and awareness of the position. So I used that to really, get the group to start talking to each other, and we would have a whole lot of meetings, and they were the technical experts. They had to teach me, and I'm really glad that they were so willing to help me where I was in that position, learn more about their jobs, and I could kind of help them, do what needed to be done, especially because there were so many different staff, and they really needed somebody to help coordinate new processes. So as my comfort level grew with the Ranger program and managing that, I found myself with more time and ability to take on other initiatives, like our new work that was happening in the agricultural sector, where we were working with farmers upstream to help make operational changes so they could maybe keep more nutrients on the field. And we were continuing to do educational outreach. So in this picture, you can see one of our rangers in the boats right in front of Hoover Dam. And then a couple of the initiatives I was working on, around this time to, let people know more about what was going on around the reservoirs. As we restored shorelines, we had to put signs up to let people know what was going on. We were also looking to minimize the number of Canada geese that we had at the time. So we had a whole initiative on educational outreach around feeding geese. So in 2008, the Watershed Manager position was vacant again. and I had another opportunity to apply. I had 5 years of supervisory experience under my belt at this point. But there was some other things in my back of my head. I had just gotten married. I had a brand new baby. So a lot of new stuff in my life, and I did apply. I didn't get the position again, and I would say, you know, looking back, I don't regret that either. You know, it just wasn't good timing, and now I know I wouldn't have been very prepared either compared to what I know now. I wouldn't have had the knowledge to really succeed, or I might have stumbled. So to tell you just a little bit about what we do at Watershed, I thought this would be a good place to kind of insert what we're responsible for. So the Watershed Management Section, it is taking care of the reservoirs and the dams and all the associated infrastructure. We're monitoring the reservoirs, looking for anything that might damage our property. The ranger staff, you know, they're there to respond to incidents that could threaten water quality or be safety issues for the public or any of our infrastructure. Our maintenance staff is very active in maintaining the dams and all the grounds, all the city property that surrounds each of our reservoirs. So it's a big job with a lot of responsibility, and it's also pretty widespread. Our watersheds go out into multiple counties. There's a lot of ground to cover. And so you can imagine, you know, as someone who was interested in stepping into a management role, it was a little intimidating to think about the pure scale of everything that watershed management was responsible for, especially activities like, you know, maintenance, where I didn't have a strong maintenance background. And so I was a little nervous about, you know, whether I would have that technical aptitude to step into a manager role that was responsible for maintenance. So in 2008, 2016, this era, there was a lot of projects going on around the reservoirs. And looking back, I'm thankful I wasn't serving as the watershed manager during this time period, because it allowed me a little more level of comfort to participate in all of these new projects without the ultimate responsibility to make sure that they went right. So we had things like a green infrastructure initiative that brought over 20 installations of bioswales, rain gardens, bioretention basins, and pervious pavement around all 3 reservoirs. We also did a lot of work to plan for emergencies, both floods and then just dam safety planning. We had a new bike path that was installed in cooperation with an adjacent municipality, and that bike path brought so many new visitors to the reservoir. So it was wonderful to be a part of these activities. I was involved in every single one. And it was a great area of my personal growth, you know, just seeing these projects from start to completion, seeing our maintenance and ranger teams start to work closer together. I also served as a Watershed Master Plan PM during this time, which was a very extensive look at our operation and all the things that we should be doing, the risks we faced, and the opportunities to address those. During this time, I also had my first introduction to the Children's Water Festival. I started out as a presenter in the first festival we had, which was around 2007 or 2008, I think, at the state lawn of the Ohio State House downtown. And then I stepped into a more of a leadership role there, and I've currently served as a co-planner of that festival basically since 2010. So we're going on about our 15th or 16th year of the festival. I also had more opportunity to kind of work on my graphic skills, and we created a whole series of signs with some of the rangers who were also good artists. So it was really fun to be able to have outlets for that side of me that wanted to be creative and that wanted to you know, feel like I had an element of arts in my work. But also during this time, this 2008 to 2016, I had a second child. So with 2 children that were very young and a full-time job, it's a lot. It's a lot to deal with. So I felt like this would be a good time to talk about the work-life balance for me. So my 2 sons were born, you know, very close to each other. They're both 20 months apart. And so I had 2 in diapers under the age of 2. Both my husband and I were trying to work full time, and so we needed childcare. We were very lucky that we found good options in our neighborhood for full-time childcare for both of our boys. options that made us feel very comfortable about, leaving them there, and no real sense of guilt. But those were very hard to get into. I'll never forget the morning in December that my husband had to get up at 4 in the morning to go stand in line in a parking lot to get one of 3 spots for the open childcare that summer that we needed so desperately. And we got it. We got it. But that's one of those things that is so difficult. And if you've been in this situation, as a mother, father, you realize how important that early childcare is to your ability to work, to focus on work. And these pictures are of my 2 sons. And I guess as they were growing up, they were always aware that, mom works for the Division of Water, mom works at the reservoirs. And I would often bring them, to work with me for things like litter cleanup so they could see where I worked. And I have about 16 pictures of these kids. I've tried to get them out here every year, so I'll have a great history of them kind of growing up at the litter cleanups. But I also like this picture in the bottom right. It's me doing an interview with the Nature Conservancy when I was about 9 months pregnant. And all I could think about was, I need to hide this baby bump. So I had to borrow my husband's coat. But it was a good memory. And that childcare issue, it does get better. It'll come back again, when you have children and they're off in the summertime and you need to figure out, what am I going to do with these kids all summer? So from that standpoint, I've got to plug the camps, get your kids in these camps. It's good for you. It's good for them. Okay, so in 2017, I had another opportunity to apply for the Watershed Manager role. And this time it felt right. I really felt like I had had as much experience as I was going to get, understanding our activities, what we were doing, where we were going, the relationships that we had with all the stakeholders. We interact with a lot of county and state agencies, and I had a whole lot more comfort level with maintenance as well. So I applied and I got selected, and it's been a great experience so far. And it's only great because I really work with a great team. We've been able to accomplish so much in this era, both from the maintenance side, taking on responsibilities for that new reservoir, and just on a ranger side and stewardship side, making some great advancements in how we're caring for the reservoirs and the shoreline property. It also feels really good to, take my experience and be able to share that with others who are just coming into the position. I feel like there's a lot of history to what we do and why we do it. And so I often feel like the one that's kind of explaining and giving the background to someone who's only been here a couple years. The perspective of someone who's been here 30 is a little bit different. But I also try not to be that person who's just like, well, we got to do it this way, because I realize that there's new ideas, there's new ways of doing things, there's new technology. And so I don't want to be that anchor that holds people back. I just try and be a guide that, helps them stay in the right direction. So looking back on whether or not this was the right career choice, I would say yes, for sure. For me, it was a great career that allowed me to continue to work with kids and do the things I love. There was also plenty of outlets for my artistic interests, from sign development to photography. So if that's your passion, you like being crafty and creative, you can usually find outlets for that in any job. Looking back, some of the biggest things I did that create the biggest memories were things I never saw coming. Joining the softball team at work and being a part of that fun. Helping a community group that ran a dance program. I knew nothing about dance, and I helped them with a program that they ran that involved about 10 different Columbus City schools, presenting the concept of water through dance. Coming full circle and hosting interns myself. One summer we had 3 student interns all at once, and I didn't want to say no to anybody who wanted to be an intern and they were looking for places to host interns. We took on 3, and it was wonderful. And I've just heard that one of our interns who went on to a full-time job is now supervising interns this summer. So we've kind of come full circle twice. So that's great to see and to share, kind of giving back those experiences that were so good for me. And then, of course, staying involved in OSU and giving back into the programs that's kind of guiding the next generation. So just thinking a little bit about, what it was like to be a woman in this field, I would say it's really been a great time to be a woman in the Division of Water. During this era that I've worked in, we've seen the first female Division of Water Administrator, the first female Division of Water Plant Manager, and I was the first Watershed Manager that was a woman. But really, it's the success that I've felt has been because of, all the women in positions, leadership positions, both at city level and seeing women in positions at the county and state level, directors levels positions, the women engineers and all engineers really that helped me by answering questions when I needed to know something. But it was really everybody who was willing to take the time and help me to understand something that I wasn't aware of. Our dam safety professionals, our rangers, my manager. So I would say the thing that has helped me succeed is just through the generosity of my coworkers and the support of my team, and of course my husband and family, because they've been my really safety net and helped me focus on work. And there are definitely times when work takes priority over family, but there's also times when family takes priority over work. So I think, thinking about that and knowing that, yes, that's okay to say that. That's what's helped me get along. So reflecting on maybe some skills that helped me succeed. I know a lot of people coming out of high school or college, they want to know, what do I need to do to really be valuable and successful? And they focus on hard skills. And I would say, don't discount the value of soft skills. Being a good writer is really important. And it's something that you can develop. That's why I use the term becoming a good writer, because it takes practice. And when you're a good writer, you're a good communicator. And it's just so important to be able to communicate and articulate in a way that conveys your information, whether that's an email, a presentation, or a document. So continue to look for ways to improve your writing. Secondly, it's okay and it's a good thing to be a quiet leader if that's your nature, meaning, leaders are not just the loudest, most vocal person in the room. They can be the person who's listening and taking in all the other information and helping to drive towards decisions, encouraging the discussion and the collaboration. And I felt like, I didn't always see myself as a leader until I learned about the term quiet leader. And I thought, well, maybe I could be a leader. I'm just not really a loud person. And then finally, being creative. If that's something you enjoy, don't be afraid to let that show. So last slide here is just some drops of insight. In my career, I've seen that sometimes you need to be an oak and sometimes you need to be a willow. Okay, this reference to trees, oaks are very, very strong and solid, and they don't bend as much in the wind, and willows kind of go with the flow. That's kind of good advice, because there are issues that come down the pike that you really just kind of need to go with it, and then there's times when you have to take a stand. So know the difference. I also want to put another plug in for getting the kids the outdoor experiences like stream study and just seeing how important those are for developing an appreciation for water and water quality. I know I was lucky enough to have a lot of experiences like that as a young person, but not every person has had that fortune of getting their feet wet, as a child. So we need to think about ways to either build that into experiences that kids have, and even as an adult, you can still pick up a fishing rod and come to the reservoir and learn more and develop that appreciation. That's what we try to do with a lot of our interns. We're continuing to see that as a great way to develop maybe a future watershed employee or someone who's new to the water industry, and focus on people that maybe haven't spent time outdoors, that have been underrepresented, and really, reach out and actively share those opportunities with those folks. And the last image here, this tree, this is a cross section of a tree, and you can see that the tree has growth rings, and some growth rings are wider than others. So in my mind, the larger growth ring represents, aspects of your career, the things you're going to encounter in life that are really going to help you grow more than others. It could be a challenging project that you didn't realize how beneficial that would be for your career. It could be, you know, the challenge of, gee, do I decide to participate in this committee or not, or go to this event or not? And when you do that, these are challenges by choice. You're really putting yourself in a position to grow in ways that you otherwise wouldn't, and you'll never know where those will lead. So on that note, I wanted to thank the AWWA Diversity and Inclusion and Young Professionals Group for challenging me to give this presentation. It really was a great look back at my career, a great opportunity to think about all the people that helped me get here, and I'm anxious to share my experience with others. So that concludes it, unless there's questions.
Lorraine, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today, and being vulnerable and sharing your story, especially highlighting the importance of diversity and different aspects of the water industry. And I think that your presentation highlights the breadth of the water industry and different segments that we may not think of every day in our jobs. We are right up on time, so we don't have any opportunity to take questions today, but I did want to, before everybody hops off, I did want to encourage you to watch for our next Diversity in Water Speaker Series event, which will be May 8th. That'll be another noon event. So we'll be sending out more information in the future, so be on the lookout for that. Lorraine, again, I want to thank you for taking the time to speak with us, and I want to thank our audience members for joining us today.
Lorraine, would you mind throwing your email for maybe people that might want to reach out with questions? Because there were some good questions in the chat. Unfortunately, we didn't get time to get to them, but maybe if people wanted to connect with you after the fact, if you're comfortable putting your email in the chat box, maybe.
Okay.
In lieu of taking the questions now.
Sure.
Thank you. That was a really incredible presentation and really inspiring. So I really enjoyed that.
Also, for those in the audience, we do have a YouTube page for the Diversity in Water Speaker Series. Just search Diversity in Water YouTube and you'll find it, and then you'll see all of our past presentations, and you'll be able to see a recording of Lorraine's presentation today. Lorraine has put her email address in the chat, so feel free to reach out to her if you have any specific questions that you would like to follow up with her on. Thank you again, everyone.
Thank you.